What is up, everybody? Alex Scott here with jamplay.com, and welcome to an all-new and super exciting live course, Radical Rhythms. Over the next 10 weeks, we are going to be dealing with rhythms, which may sound a little bit kind of boring maybe, or like, rhythms, kind of something that everybody learns right when we're getting started on our instruments. Why should we dedicate this whole course to it? What's so interesting about rhythm? And the answer is a ton. A lot of stuff is really interesting about rhythm. Rhythm is, like, I've taught a lot of different courses for Jamplay over the years. And almost everything that I've taught, and I know this is true of a lot of other teachers as well, we focus a lot on notes, we focus a lot on scales, we focus a lot on chords, we focus a lot on harmony, and just kind of the ins and outs of all that more note-related stuff. And that's obviously very, very important. Scales and chords and all that stuff are absolutely one of the backbones of music. But the other one, and one that I feel like gets a little bit neglected by teachers and players alike, is just really focusing on the idea of rhythm. So over the next 10 weeks, we are going to be going through a ton of different concepts, all in and around and relating to rhythm. There's going to be some stuff that is really, really basic. There's going to be some stuff that gets pretty advanced. So it's going to really run the gamut in terms of difficulty. So no matter what level you are as a player, you should be able to find a lot of stuff to both kind of take you back to your roots and really get back to basics, but then stuff to really push you and challenge you to become more of an advanced level player as well. Now, the course is going to work a little bit differently than some of the other live courses that we've done in the past, particularly in terms of the notation. If any of you guys watching have downloaded the notation in advance of this course, you'll probably notice that there are no actual notes in the notation. It's all what we call slash notation, which we'll see here on the screen in a little bit when we get into today's kind of intro lesson. And the reason for that is that I wanted to try to structure this course so that, I am teaching it on bass, but it is 100% as applicable to guitarists as well. Kind of the approach that I want you guys to take with this is to take this slash notation, okay, which is going to give you just kind of a basic outline of the rhythm that we're talking about, or the rhythmic elements that we're talking about. And then we do have backing tracks like we always have, and those backing tracks are in kind of a key. But instead of teaching you guys a specific bass line or a specific chord progression or chord voicing or anything like that, I'm just going to be giving you guys sort of these rhythmic ideas, and then the backing tracks that we've included will be in a key. From there, it's up to you guys to structure your own practice and kind of do whatever you want to do. So, for instance, today, when we get into the actual lesson here in a minute, we're going to be talking about the most basic rhythms that we have, which is 4/4 time signature, quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, and we're going to talk a little bit about dotted notes. So as we're playing through, along with the track, if you're a bass player, let's say we're practicing quarter notes. This particular track today is in the key of C minor. So you can just play a C and play quarter notes. You could also play quarter notes using notes within your C scale. Same for guitar players. If you want to practice like kind of lead playing or riff playing, single note focused playing, pick one note, pick a scale, and just practice the rhythm within the confines of whatever you're trying to do. If you're plucking single notes, if you're moving around within a scale, whatever it is you're doing. If you want to practice chords, you can absolutely practice chords, voicings, anywhere up and down the neck. So what I'm really hoping for is that structuring this course in this way is going to give you guys a lot of flexibility in terms of your practice routine. You guys are going to be able to take other things that you might be working on. Let's say you're a beginning rhythm guitar player, but you want to practice lead more. You can kind of kill two birds with one stone in this course, and that you can practice some of those scales that you want to work on, but at the same time be working on your rhythm. and working on some of these rhythmic concepts. See what I mean? So I'll be referring back to this and giving you guys some ideas as we work through the course, so you guys won't be just totally on your own to come up with it. I can definitely give a little bit more guidance in terms of what you might want to play alongside these rhythms. As always, we do have the guided practice lessons as well that are going to correspond with each week. Those are going to be available on the JamPlay site for members. So if you are watching this on Facebook or anywhere else and you're not yet a member of JamPlay, definitely head to jamplay.com, check it out. Give us a subscribe if you feel like we'd be valuable to you. I definitely think that we would, and you get access to so much cool bonus content like those guided practice lessons, notation. You can download all these different tracks to play along with as we work through them. There's just all kinds of great stuff there on the site. So, what are we actually going to be looking at through the course of the next 10 weeks? Well, like I said a moment ago, today we're going to be starting off with something that seems really basic at first, and part of it is very, very basic, but we're going to get a bit more advanced with it as well. We're going to be looking at 4/4 time with quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, and then dotted eighth notes, okay? So that's what we're looking at today, and it's all going to be in the key of C minor, kind of a medium tempo alongside this track that I have prepared for you guys. We're going to start by just talking about each rhythm, and then maybe doing a little bit of clapping, especially when we get to the dotted notes. Those can be a little bit tricky, but that's going to kind of be the general I don't know how you would call it, the rhythm for each week. Is we'll start with just breaking the rhythm down and then playing alongside the track and replicating that rhythm a couple different times. So we're starting this week with really basic stuff, quarters, eighths, sixteenths. We are going to get into triplets also in the coming weeks, and kind of the difference between triplet figures and dotted eighth figures, which can trip a lot of people up. Throughout the rest of the course, though, we're going to cover some really, really cool stuff. We're going to get into odd time signatures, okay? Odd time is really, really fun. It's something a lot of players are really interested in, but feel like it's really intimidating to get into. It can be very, very tricky to navigate on your own. But I'm going to give you guys some tips and techniques in a couple of different odd time signatures to be able to play in those odd rhythms really naturally and be able to feel them really, really naturally. We're also going to talk a little bit about polyrhythms. And then when we get to the last couple of weeks of the course, we're going to do some genre studies. So I'm going to teach you guys in a couple of different genres, and we're going to look at specific rhythmic motifs within those genres, like rock. We've got kind of a world music thing, a jazz funk thing. So this course is going to cover a lot of ground, and I'm really hoping that it's going to be especially great for guys who have practice routines where they feel like they need to spice things up. They're tired of just strumming the same old chords, and they want to bring something into their practice that is going to make things a little bit more fun, a little bit more challenging, and help them cover a little bit more ground. So that's kind of an outline overview of what we're going to be doing for the next 10 weeks. Thank you guys again so much for joining me here on the first week, and I hope you guys will stick with me through to the end. But in terms of our first lesson, our first week for today, as I said, everything we're doing is focused in the key of C minor. When we get to the track, you guys will hear that's kind of the key that we're in. So if you are practicing along, that's going to want to, you're going to want to live in that either C minor scale or different C minor chord voicings, depending on what instrument you're playing. But what is kind of the most basic level of rhythm? To me, in the context of Western music, if you're talking about most of the stuff that we all listen to on the radio, your rock, your country, your funk, a lot of your jazz, anything like that, blues, we're normally talking about stuff that is in a 4/4 time signature. Now, a lot of you guys probably already know what that means, but just for any beginners among us, let's break that down a little bit. So the way a time signature works, you have these two numbers, right? 4/4. You can have 2/4 time, you can have 6/8 time, you can have 5/8 time, 7/8 time, 11/8 time. What you really need to know is that the top number is the number of beats that you're going to have in a bar. So in the case of 4/4, we have 4 beats per bar. That means we count to 4, start over. Really, really simple. If you have an odd time, like 5/8 or 7/8 or 5/4, 7/4, you're going to be counting 5 beats or 7 beats. Or in the case of 3, you'd be counting 3 beats, obviously. Like I said, we're going to get into odd time a little bit later on, but that's what that top number in that kind of fraction, that time signature fraction, means. So what does the bottom number mean? And the bottom number is, you can think of as what we would call a subdivision. We're going to talk about subdivisions a lot over the next 10 weeks and different ways to subdivide things. All subdivision means is when you're saying that you're counting to 4 within a bar, how are you cutting that bar up? Are you cutting it up into eighth notes and you're giving each eighth note a value of 1? Are you cutting it up into 16th notes even, or quarter notes? Well, 4/4 means that you have 4 beats in a bar, and each of those beats is a quarter note, okay? That's what the 4 on the bottom means. How this translates into practicality, or kind of how I think about it, is that generally if you see an 8 on the bottom, you're going to be thinking the whatever kind of song you're playing or whatever groove you're playing is going to generally be a little bit faster because you're subdividing by eighth notes. There's other practical reasons when it comes to actually writing music notation out why you would choose to subdivide by eighths when you're writing as opposed to quarters. But for me, if I'm thinking a song is in 5/4, that's generally going to be, or 4/4, whatever, that's going to generally be a little bit slower. And then if something is in 5/8 and you're counting eighth notes as opposed to quarter notes, it's generally going to be a little bit quicker. We aren't going to do much with an eighth subdivision just because it's a little bit less common. We're going to be focusing on quarter note subdivisions through the whole course because that's, again, that's really mostly what we see. It's the most common way to subdivide a bar that we see is into those quarter notes. So that's 4/4. 4 beats in the bar, subdivided by quarter notes. So what we're going to start off by doing, I'm going to pull up our track here, and we're just going to play quarter notes, okay? Now, again, there's going to be moments in this whole course where you're going to go, geez, quarter notes? That's so easy. Why are we just going to sit here for 2 straight minutes and just play quarter notes? This is really great practice, trust me. It's stuff like this that really makes you break down your own playing technique and gives you time to really focus on different elements of your own playing technique. So staying relaxed, all that kind of stuff. As I said earlier, you can also spice this up and say, okay, I'm going to do quarter note chords. I'm going to strum, whatever, the C minor chord. I'm just going to strum quarter note chords if you're a guitar player. Or I'm going to play a C minor scale in quarter notes. Right? Just our basic minor scale. You don't just have to sit there and play one static note. I'll probably start by doing that and then spice it up. But I want you guys to tailor these exercises to your own practice routines and what you guys are trying to work on and get better at. So, another really great trick, actually, before we get into the track, a really, really handy trick when you are listening to something, if you're not really used to counting, is to listen for the drums. And especially if you're trying to figure out whether or not something is in 4/4 time, listen to the drums, because 95 times out of 100, the drums follow a very common pattern, even between different styles of music, whether it's rock or country or blues or something like that. 95 times out of 100, the kick drum is going to be happening on the 1, on the first beat of the bar, and then the snare drum is going to be happening on the second beat and the fourth beat, okay? So that's where you get your kind of classic boom, clack, clack, boom, clack, clack, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you're ever finding yourself getting lost or having some trouble counting along with something, always listen for your kick and snare. So I want you guys to pay attention to that as we get into playing quarter notes with this track. So again, C minor, however you guys want to play along with it, feel free. But we're just going to do quarter notes. 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. So hear how that snare drum is happening on the 2 and 4. 2, 4, 2, 4, 2, 4. Okay, now I'm going to move to a scale. One, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. About octaves. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Make sure we're staying relaxed. Our technique looks nice. Everything sounds clean. Back to octaves. Why not? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's try a chord. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there you go. Quarter notes. Dead simple, dead easy. But again, I mean, even for a guy like me, where I've been playing bass for the better part of 20 years and do it full time as my job, I still go back and will practice stuff like this on my own. It seems dead simple, but where it really becomes really helpful, at least for me, is it kind of brings you back to your roots. It brings you back to basics, but it also really lets you sit there and analyze your own technique and go, is every note that I'm playing, they're all clean, right? Am I stressed? Am I not relaxed? Is something out of whack? And it just gives you a nice kind of baseline to go from, where you can shift around and adjust stuff as needed. If maybe you're realizing like, oh, I guess I'm, pushing a little bit too hard with the left hand, or my right hand feels a little bit tense or something like that. Doing really simple exercises like this is going to help you guys in all of those ways. But then also, it really helps with feel. So that's why I kind of wanted to start this whole course with quarter notes, and then in a minute we're going to do eighths and then get into sixteenths. But just really, really, really dead simple stuff like this. It makes you pay attention to your time, makes you pay attention to your feel, makes you pay attention to really locking in with those drums, locking in with the click, locking in with the rest of the band, whatever else is going on. It just forces you to really pay attention to something that seems basic and is second nature, but the better you ingrain that basic stuff in there, it's just going to make all of your playing better. It's going to make your time tighter, make your feel tighter, improve your technique, all this cool stuff. So that's quarter notes for you. Let's talk about eighth notes now, which is very, very simple. Again, a lot of you guys probably already know this stuff, but just in case there's beginners with us, if you cut a quarter note in half, what do you get? You get an eighth note. So it's happening twice as fast, right? Now, a lot of times, if you're looking for kind of a reference in terms of the rest of the band, the hi-hat on the drums, will be going at an eighth note pace, which in this particular track, it's switching between an eighth note pace and a 16th note figure, which we'll get to sixteenths in a moment here. But let's go ahead and play through, do exactly the same thing that we just did, but now I want you guys to focus on eighth notes. Again, chords is fine, playing up and down a scale is fine. Guitar players, if you want to just work on your up down kind of alternate picking stuff, move around on the neck, anything like that, move between two notes, anything like that. Just pick two things that work, or one thing, or any number of things that work within the key of C. The main thing that you want to be focused on is that rhythm, and that you're keeping a consistent eighth note rhythm going on. So let's pull up the track again from the beginning here and go through that again with some eighth notes. See how that goes. Excuse me. 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. It's a scale for you. Try a chord now. One and 2 and 3 and 4 and. That's how we can count eighth notes really easily. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Just add that and in between your quarter notes. 2 and 3 and 4 and. Back to single notes. There's a good fretboard exercise. Jumping up an octave like that. And 3 and 4 and. Just really paying attention to that groove. 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Eighth notes, super simple, right? But definitely a little bit harder than quarter notes, especially if you're a beginning player, because now suddenly everything is coming twice as fast. But, you know, when you guys are practicing this stuff on your own, as you're working through this stuff on your own, you can definitely, you know, if you're having trouble just with a straight nonstop string of eighth notes, change it up. Do quarters and eighths together. So like quarter, eighth, 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 or quarter, eighth, eighth, quarter, eighth, eighth, quarter. 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, and. That kind of a thing, right? I really, you know, in addition to talking about rhythms, like I've been saying this whole time so far, I just really want you guys to focus on kind of structuring your own practice within this, to really deciding what it is that you guys want to work on, but then pair that to the rhythms that I'm trying to show you guys and that we're talking about through the whole thing. Because that also then is going to help you guys work on your improvisational skills a little bit. That's kind of the root of improvisation, is being like, well, I have a rhythmic framework or I have a chordal framework. What do I play within that? That's exactly what we're going after here, is looking at like, okay, well, it just has to be eighth notes the whole time, or as close as I can get to that. What do I want to do? Do I want to do scales? Do I want to strum chords? Any of it, all of it is good. So, eighth notes, check. Quarter notes, check. We're going down the line here. Now, the last, and what's going to be the trickiest, or at least in terms of raw speed, is going to be 16th notes, which is, again, you take your eighth note, you cut that in half. What do you get is a 16th note. So where we started with 1, 2, 3, 4, just counting the numbers. Now, eighth notes, we go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, right? We add in the ands in between. Now we got to get even more in-betweens in there. And in typical English parlance, we say 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and. So a lot of times if I'm trying to talk about like a syncopated rhythm, or if, you know, somebody's playing a chord in an unusual spot, we use those little syllables, 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and, to signify where, on which 16th note something is happening. So I might go to you and say, oh, it happens on the E of 2, which would be 1 E and a 2 E. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. That would be the E of 2. And you can do that with any of the and of 3 or the of 4. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a. So those little kind of syllable things that you can stick in there just when you're verbally counting can help you to figure out where you are in the bar, or if you're listening or trying to learn a song maybe. And you can hear that it's something that is using 16th notes, you can count it to yourself, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and oh, okay, so it's the and of 3 and the E, or the of 4. It can help you to figure out rhythms like that. But as we've done with quarters and eighths, let's go ahead, go back to the top of the track, and now let's run it alongside, or let's run some 16th notes alongside the track, okay? So this is going to be one where if you are more of a beginner player, this might be a little bit challenging for you. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. It's about the pace we're going to be going at. So for guitar players in particular, this is going to be really good for you guys to practice that up-down picking. Practicing scales is great over this. Right? It's going to be great for that. So, but then if you are more of a beginning player or an intermediate player or something, and you can't quite push your speed to that level yet, that's okay. Stick with eighths for now, or if you can, dun 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 dun, get a couple of sixteenths in there. That's fine as well. Just work up to the point where you can get along with these sixteenths. You'll be in really, really good shape. So it's a great speed exercise from that perspective as well. But let's go back to the top of the track here, and hear how some 16th notes sound. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. Great practice for bass players as well. Let's try a scale. Ha ha ha. Alternating octaves. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4. That's hard, man. So this one can definitely get a little bit challenging. Even for me. Ouch. Man, that's a burner. Especially when you start working around on those scales and stuff. And, again, this whole course is going to be a little bit different also just in the sense that obviously we're not as much focusing on stuff that's really musical. I would pretty much never just sit there in a band and go, whatever, or play a scale that fast, just up and down and up and down. But they're all really cool technical challenges that are just going to make your playing that much better. And because we're focusing on rhythm the entire time, even if, like for me right there, like I kind of lost it on the scale a few times or something like that, I'm not really that worried about it because the more, like I said, I'm not going to do that in a musical context, A. And B, just the fact that you're doing it and you're working on getting it tighter, that's going to do nothing but increase your speed, increase your accuracy, make your feel and your time better, and make you pay that much more attention to other stuff that's going on. Now, you guitar players with some of that, that kind of stuff, you guys have a little bit of an advantage there because you can do the up and down picking, which makes that stuff a little bit easier. That is mainly going to be a really good left hand exercise for you guys as well, and kind of string crossing over all that kind of stuff. But do with this stuff what you will. If you guys want to just work on one string and really get that down and then move on to scales or chords or something else, that is totally valid as well. It looks like maybe do we have a question jumping in here?
We do have a question.
Okay, great.
And I do want to remind everybody, if you do have questions,
yes,
get them in.
Yeah. I actually totally forgot to mention. Yeah. So as always, with all of our other live courses, we're going to be leaving the whole end of the session to you guys' questions. So please, as we're going through the lesson, if you guys have any questions at all, no matter where you are on Facebook or anywhere else, we're monitoring everything. We've got Captain Chris here, our wonderful director. We will get your questions up on screen. We can do a little bit of dialogue. So what do we got?
We got a question from Dave here. Do you ever encounter anything faster than 16th notes?
Greetings, Dave. Thank you so much for tuning in. Yes, you definitely can. You can keep subdividing until you're blue in the face. And there are definitely, especially when you get into like classical stuff, it can get really, really crazy. I personally have seen written up to 64th notes, which is not really very playable like pianists are pretty much the only people who can really play that fast. And I know like there's some metal guitarists out there that can get, when you get into the sweep picking and stuff. So yes, you can definitely get faster than 16ths. The only thing that I normally see faster than 16ths is 16th triplets, which, just to give you an idea, I won't do it for the whole track. And we'll get into triplets more next week, but a 16th triplet, well, a 16th note again, 2E and this is a 16th, right? It's actually even easier to drum on your knees to get that fast, but that would be a 16th triplet. Bugada, 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 ba. Really quite quick. And that just, again, we'll talk more about triplets next week, but triplets basically, instead of doing sort of 2 16th notes, you think of it as 3 in the same amount of space. I'll get into more technical stuff on triplets next week. But yes, there exist things faster than 16th notes. Do you typically see them? Sometimes if you're soloing or transcribing a solo or something like that, or it's a more, you're trying to learn like a Frank Zappa melody or something like that, something a little bit more proggy or a little bit more advanced, you'll see 16th notes. You occasionally see 30 seconds, but it just becomes so difficult to play beyond that. And then also you can actually reach a point, like if there's any kind of bass nerd guys out there like myself watching, check out Matt Garrison. He's a New York bass player who's absolutely incredible. One of the most technically proficient bass players on earth, as far as I'm concerned. But he plays with this 4-finger technique where he's using ring, middle, index, and his thumb to get these crazy fast licks going. I can barely even do it because it's really, really difficult to get the dexterity up. But Matt can play a scale faster than his strings can actually sound the notes. So it sounds kind of funny sometimes because he'll be soloing and he'll go for a big cascading, and it just sounds like, even though he's playing all these notes, he's hitting the strings so fast that they don't even have enough time to like swing back and forth and make the note happen before he's already moved on to the next note. Or like you'll hear that with like the sweep metal guitar guys, where they're going so fast you can't even really hear what they're doing anymore because it's just wow, wow, wow. And that's really cool, but if you were to write that out, that would be 30 seconds or 30-second triplets or 64ths or something like that. And it can be used to cool effect. If you're that technically proficient as a player, by all means use that stuff. But this is just a very long way of saying, in sort of common music that you're going to be learning 9 times out of 10, if you're in a rock band or a blues band or jamming with your friends or something, you're really not going to need to worry about much faster than 16ths or maybe 16th triplets. So they exist, just not very common and incredibly difficult to play, basically. So, great question, though. Thank you very much for chiming in. And yeah, anybody else who has questions, like I said, Captain Chris is a man in the old computer box there. Just chat in if you're part of the live chat or comment on Facebook or anything, and we will get your questions up on the screen. So, we have covered quarter notes, we've covered eighth notes, we've covered 16th notes, much to the chagrin of my right hand. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about with these kind of most basic level rhythms is dotted eighth notes. So can we actually, Chris, do you have the sort of notation for today? Yeah, great. Okay, so if you look here, this is our slash notation that I was talking about earlier. We have, on our top line, we have quarter notes. That's how you write quarter notes, in case you were curious. Second line down, we have eighth notes. Obviously, you can see where there was one quarter note, now we have 2 eighth notes. The line beneath that is 16th notes with the double bars up on top. And that, again, where you would have 1 eighth note, now you have 2 16th notes. And then if you go all the way back up where you have 1 quarter note, you now have 4 16th notes. So it's all just subdivision. It's all just chopping up. But then the last 2 bars, which are, or the last 2 lines, rather, which are connected, as you can see with the repeat signs down there, look a little bit funky. And you're probably looking at them going, oh, wait, hang on, what's the deal there? These are dotted eighths. Okay, so when you dot a note in rhythmic nomenclature, what you're doing, what that little dot, if you see the dot next to each of the little X's down there, all that means is that you are taking half of that rhythm's value and adding it on. So if you were to dot a quarter note, what you're saying is, okay, we're going to play a quarter note and we're going to extend it half the length of a quarter note. Well, what's half the length of a quarter note? An eighth note. So you're effectively saying that we're adding a little extra eighth note, not playing a second note, just time-wise, we're tying it on so that now it's like a quarter note and a half. Or you can even think of it as 3/8 notes all tied together, right, in terms of time, thinking of subdivisions. Or a dotted quarter you could also think of as having the same value as 6/16 notes, okay? It gets mathy, it gets fractiony, it's kind of fun. So that would be a dotted quarter. These are dotted eighths. So what we're saying is we're going to play an eighth note, and then what's half of the value of an eighth note, rhythmically speaking? 16th note. So it's an eighth and a 16th tied together. So to go back to my 1e and a 2e and a thing, those little extra syllables, each one of those 1e and a, 2e and a, those are all getting the value of 1/16th note, right? So when you dot an eighth note, now it's getting the value of 3/16th notes. 1e and would all be one tied note, one held note, and then on the of 1, you would start your next note. So what this basically gives you is this really cool thing where you have almost a second rhythm going on that's counter to the first rhythm. And it ends up cycling in 3-bar cycles. Don't worry too much about that right now because it's much easier to hear that than it is to think about it. But that's also why there are kind of 3 bars and then it repeats, as opposed to normally you'd have 2 or 4 if everything were nice and even. But for this, I'm just going to tap my foot here. Hopefully you guys can hear that a little bit. Or actually, here, let me pull up. I do have a metronome on my phone here. Because I just want to count through this and kind of clap alongside it. So here we go. Here's just a nice little basic metronome. This is at 85 beats per minute. Okay? So obviously quarters, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 16ths, 1e and a 2e and a 3e and a 4e and a, right? We know all that. So what about dotted eighths? Well, if you think about counting 16ths, 1e and a 2e and a 3e and a 4e and then taking 3 of those 16ths and bunching them all together. Something akin to 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. That's what a dotted eighth would sound like against a plain pulse like this. So let's see if we can add some eighth notes in here. Hang on, how do we do this? I'm not sure how to do this with this metronome. Here we go. 1 second. Sorry. I didn't actually think a whole lot about using this. So same tempo, but now eighth notes. 1e and a 2e and a 3e and a 4e and a. There's our 16ths again, right? 1e and a 2e and a 3e and a 4e and a. Group those in threes. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. Okay, that's what a continuous string of dotted eighth notes would sound like, which is what we have expressed in these bottom 2 lines here in the notation, and that's what we're going to play along with the track. Now, you're probably going, well, why? I don't get it. That just sounds like a bunch of kind of noise almost. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Well, as you'll see, when we actually play along with the track here, it sounds really, really cool. And it's a really cool way to, if you're ever trying to write a melody, or if you are ever trying to do something cool with chords where you're like, oh, I want to kind of, I have this chord progression, but I don't just want to go 1, 2, 3, 4. That's kind of boring. you can use something like a dotted eighth note to spice up where your chords are happening. Or to spice up where a melody is changing, or where a key center is changing, or anything like that. In songwriting, it can be a really, really cool tool to kind of do something unexpected, change things up a little bit. I wouldn't necessarily do it how we're going to do it, which is just kind of like hammering a dotted eighth pattern over 4/4. But it can just be a really cool kind of little rhythmic spice, a little bit of extra flavor that you can add in with your writing something, or when you're writing something, rather. Another thing that dotted notes are really useful for are just in the act of writing music. You'll end up in a lot of situations where you maybe you're learning a solo or something like that, and you're trying to figure out how to count or how to write something out. Dotted notes are very useful because it's actually very natural to sometimes play. Like for instance, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 1 E 2 E 1 like that, right? Something like that, where it's a pretty simple rhythm. We would express that if we were writing it out by using a dotted note. So they're used a lot in writing music as well. But they just, to me, even more than any of that, they just have a really, really cool feel. So let's hear that feel in action. Let's pull up our track again. Still C minor, obviously. And I want you guys to just play this dotted eighth note figure along with me as best as you can. It's kind of hard to explain with words and with clapping and stuff. But really just the best way to do it is to hear it in context. So jump in with me if you guys have your guitars handy, and we'll play it alongside each other. 3, 4. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. Right, so we're just taking those 16th notes, grouping them up into threes. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. And you hear it doesn't always line up with the bar. It did right there. But it doesn't always line up with your downbeat. That's because it's cycling every 3 bars. It lines up. Dotted eighths. Kind of a weird one, but something that I wanted to touch on because that this whole lesson represents a lot what the whole course is going to be like. There's going to be some stuff that seems dead simple, and that kind of is dead simple to some degree, but is stuff that is really, when you really break it down and when you start to subdivide stuff and really analyze, you're like, oh wow, this rhythm thing is really crazy. I love rhythm for that exact reason. And when I'm, if I'm working, doing production on a record or something, and I'm like working with drum machines or something, I'm constantly thinking about rhythm and different ways to play around with it. It's just a great thing to be able to incorporate, especially bass players, rhythm's important because we're the foundation, but for guitar players, man, nothing makes me more excited when I'm on a gig or working on a session or, just jamming with somebody or something than a guitar player who really gets rhythm and has really great feel and knows how to, create a bar with some rhythmic stuff in it that's like using a dotted eighth pattern like that or something along those lines, or is playing around with this really cool 16th notes. And it's really tight and it's really driving and it's really, it's just really inspiring. And I think that it's something that, especially for guitar players who are kind of learning on their own or like practicing on their own, like a lot of folks on Jam Play would be, it's easy to get so caught up in like chord shapes and scale structure and progressions. And I'm not saying don't pay attention to that stuff. It's all very important. But just remember, there's this whole other half to it that has nothing to do with notes at all. It's just time. We're tearing apart time here, which I think is really cool. But it's just something that is going to make you a better player. It's going to, if anybody out there has the goal of working with a band, of recording their music, of playing shows, jamming with other people, working with other musicians, anything like that, having a really great sense of rhythm, a really great sense of time is just really going to push your playing to a whole new level. And make it really inspiring and give you all kinds of fun ideas of new stuff to try and all that, which is why I've structured the practice the way that I have, where, I'm encouraging you guys to kind of come up with your own exercises within the bounds of the rhythm. It's all about improvisation and creativity and all that kind of stuff. It's where these rhythmic tools are really going to come in handy. So that is about it in terms of lesson for today. Do we have some questions coming in?
Yeah, we got a couple questions here.
Excellent.
Wrap up here tonight.
Very great.
This one is from Dragon 007.
Excellent.
When you have the metronome, do you always follow quarter beats with your foot?
Greetings, Mr. Dragon. Thank you so much for tuning in. That's kind of a personal thing. I don't focus, when I'm thinking about like foot tapping or anything like that, I wouldn't say like, oh, always do quarters or always do eighths or always do half notes. It's different based on the situation a lot of times. Sometimes it's easier to do if it's like a faster tune. Sometimes you'll be tapping on half notes. So like every 2 beats as opposed to every quarter note, every beat. Sometimes you might be tapping eighth notes if it's a slower song. But more than thinking about when we tap our foot, I like to just focus on just moving your body. Because for some people, it's like literally just tapping their foot on the ground. For some people, it's, kind of getting up on the ball of your foot and kind of bouncing your leg up and down. I see that a lot. For me, like, I'll lean back and forth in time with the music, or bobbing your head or nodding along. There's a lot of different little things we can do with our bodies to help us keep time, and all of them are valid. So I just also know I've worked with students in the past where they try to tap quarter notes, and they're almost thinking so much about their foot also at the same time, and like making sure that it's always tapping, that they get distracted from what they're actually trying to play. So if it's natural for you to tap quarter notes, tap quarter notes. If it's natural for you to tap eighths with your foot, do that. If it's natural for you to kind of bounce your leg or move your shoulders back and forth or bob your head or jump up and down, whatever is most natural for you, I just encourage people to move with the beat and to kind of dance a little bit. You don't have to go all footloose, but, just moving your body a little bit here and there can really help you to just lock in really naturally and get your arms and your fingers and everything just like all kind of dialed into the same grid. So yeah, whatever's most natural for you, whatever's easiest for you, or whatever kind of comes naturally for your body, do that. And just as long as you're moving in some way, it's really going to help you lock in and feel the beat a lot stronger than if you're just sitting there all clinical like. Great question though. Awesome question. Thank you so much.
All right, next one's from Patrick. Wondering, could you play, say, 3 bars of eighths, then 3 bars of dotted eighths back to back to hear the difference?
Absolutely. That's a great idea. Great question. Let's see here. Dotted eighths are going to be slower. Sorry, they're going to be slower than eighth notes because you're adding extra time onto it, right? So eighth notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Now here's dotted eighths. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1. So if you want to think about counting at that pace, 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. There's your eighths. Because it's 2 16th notes, right? 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. As opposed to 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. Eighth dotted. bump, 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 bump. That could be a cool little idea for a riff right there. Just mixing those two things bar to bar. So you could write a little melody with that. Dotted, 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 dot. And then eighth notes. Something like that. So that, I mean, first of all, there you can hear the difference of eighth notes being faster and hopefully understand that subdivision a little bit more. But that's actually a great example of how you could use dotted eighth notes or dotted notes in general really effectively within like a writing or a riff kind of a context. It's not something where I would ever like on a gig just sit there and hammer away on dotted eighths. They just add really nice flavor, do them for a bar or do them here and there within a larger pattern. And they can just spice things up a little bit and kind of shift things around. So hopefully that was helpful for you hearing those. But that also thank you for providing me with a great example of a context to use them in. So yeah, thank you so much for tuning in though, Patrick. Always appreciate seeing you, brother.
Right.
Anybody else?
Yeah, we got a couple of general questions here.
Okay,
This
great.
one's from Bobo1957. I have played guitar for years, but just picked up the bass. Do you have any tips for older learners?
Greetings, Bobo. Thank you very, very much for joining me today, for joining all of us. Glad to have you, and I'm really glad to hear that you have picked up bass coming from guitar. Tips for older learners. I don't like to separate students based on age because I don't, people from different generations learn a little bit differently and stuff like that. But my tip for any player of any level, but in particularly for you, my friend, just stay inspired. Don't stress out too much about playing or like really nailing things. That's, if there's one experience I've had with a lot of students, it's people having a tendency to like hold themselves up to standards, or people, for example, somebody just watching this lesson today could say, oh, well, I can't play these 16th notes, I can't play them that cleanly or that perfectly or for that long. This course, I'm just going to be out of my league or something like that. And never, ever, ever do that to yourself. Obviously if we're doing like an advanced jazz course or something and you're just not interested in learning that and will never want to get that good or something, then that's one thing. But just don't discourage yourself. Don't beat yourself up. Don't get frustrated. Do what you can and always enjoy it. And I think also being somebody coming from guitar, you're going to find that bass is a really natural transition. So specifically for that, don't be afraid to use a pick with bass, which you may very well already be doing. I always really encourage people to learn fingerstyle bass technique like what I use, because that is kind of what the majority of bass players do. But if it's the difference between you being inspired to pick up a bass because you can pick really well, do that. Like, absolutely don't say, oh, well, I can't do this fingerstyle thing, and then let it discourage you. So, yeah, and I guess my last tip would be tune in every week to this course because I'd love to have you here. No, but in all seriousness, I appreciate you being here, man, and I'm always stoked to hear that there's a new bass player in the world. That's awesome. And, yeah, just have fun with it. Don't get stressed out. Don't frustrate yourself if there's something you can't get. Just enjoy the ride, enjoy the journey, and enjoy the instrument. So thanks again, man. Great question.
Okay, and I think we've got time for one more here.
Okay, great.
This one's from Will, and Will would like to know what kind of bass you are using.
Greetings, Will. Thank you as well very much for tuning in, my friend. This bass is a very, very interesting instrument. I will talk about it for a moment before we wrap up here. So this bass is, in style, it is what we call a precision bass. Okay, the precision bass was the very, very first sort of type of commercially produced bass to be invented by Leo Fender in 1951. The thing that really sets it apart as a precision is the fact that it has this split pickup. Okay, so it's got this chunk of a pickup for the E and A strings, and this pickup for the D and G strings, and then it has a volume knob and a tone knob, just like any guitar would have, where it rolls off the top end, right? Rolls off those treble frequencies. So it's a Fender bass or a Fender Precision bass in style, but it is made by, or was made by, Harmony, which is a Korean company, was a Korean company, that did sort of clones, knockoffs, you could call them, of a lot of really well-known, Stratocasters, Telecasters, jazz basses, P basses, that kind of stuff back in the 70s. This particular instrument is from 1978. You can see it has a lot of lovely patina here on the back of the neck, which I love. You might ask, why am I playing this and not a vintage Fender bass? Well, A, vintage Fender basses are very prohibitively expensive. B, I've played and toured and gigged many vintage Fender basses, and this thing kicks the snot out of all of them. This bass sounds amazing. It plays amazing. Right now I have flat wound strings on it. If you guys know what flat wounds are, they're just a different type of string, basically, that guitar players have flats also, but they're a little bit less common than bass players using flats. They just have more of a rolled off kind of lower tone, darker tone. But my favorite thing about this bass is the fact that it cost $150 on Craigslist for a 1978 P bass, and it sounds monstrous. It weighs about 15 pounds. It is not a lightweight instrument. It's a solid alder, or a 3-piece alder body, maple neck with a cherry streamer in the back there. I love this thing to death. I play it probably on 80% of my gigs anytime I'm doing rock or country or blues, sometimes funk, depending on what it is. I mean, I'll play this thing on a jazz gig if it's more of like a modern progressive jazz kind of a thing that needs a bit of a grittier tone. This is a great bass for it. But, I found it because a good friend of mine by the name of Johnny Schlepper, who's a wonderful guitar player here in Colorado, he owned another Harmony bass like this, and he had a little song, $100 bass make the place go crazy. And I played his a bunch and loved it, and then set out to find my own, and one popped up on Craigslist in Denver a couple weeks later, and I was like, that is mine. But yeah, I mean, at any price, this would be an incredible instrument, but for $150, it's silly. So if you guys ever see vintage Harmony basses like this, they quit making them in '81, so it's guaranteed to be from the 70s, basically guaranteed to be from the 70s, maybe even the 60s. And they're amazing players. They just sound great. They set up great. They're really solid construction. They did just a fantastic job of kind of taking the Fender thing and cloning it at a much lower cost. So that is the bass that I'm playing, 1978 Harmony Precision bass. Thank you very much for the question, though, and appreciate you tuning in, man. Hopefully we'll see you again next week. Coolio. I think that is all the questions. Thank you, guys. Those were all great. We're going to be doing that every week, just like we always do with the live courses. We'll teach for the first 2/3 or so, and then I always love to leave time for you guys at the end. So in any case, again, my name is Alex Scott. That is week 1 of Radical Rhythms for you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm really looking forward to seeing you guys back in subsequent weeks. Tell your friends. If you guys have any questions during the week, we do watch the forums on there at jamplay.com. So definitely post any questions you guys may have there. We can get to them in the next session. Yeah, thank you guys again so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week, same place, same time. Have an awesome couple days. Bye.